There you go.
Good.
So what we did previously is that in the last 15-ish minutes, we had the moderator giving a presentation of the biography of the speaker, and then
Okay.
we slowly we start into the seminar.
All right.
Mine is very short. There's no need for 15 minutes for sure.
But that's what we call also early career or mid-career researcher, I should say.
No, I mean, that is why we are called professors, right? You can speak forever on any topic. Yeah. Anyway.
So I did invite the panelists that you suggested. And I would say a good 70% were happen not to be busy, right? And that's 20-ish or more percent were having scheduling conflict, which somewhat is expected statistically.
I think one of the issues really is that this is an unusual format and
Yeah.
uh, this early part and
Hmm. Oh, early part meaning the 30 minutes prior to the seminar?
yeah.
Okay, that was suggested to me by the predecessors.
Yeah, yeah. I think this was something that Jigang really likes to do because he likes to talk. So
Ah, okay.
and I think yeah, you know, uh, so
Yeah, no, and so it's not the 6:30. Some unfortunately some has had conflict on the regular time of the seminar, but that is somewhat expected. It was the case for the previous seminar as well.
mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what do you think, Miguel, about the? You probably have an intuition, or maybe you didn't expect that AI became such a huge explosion when you started using it into your science.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, we felt that it was going to be important because we were already looking into some of the great things that the computer science community was doing. But to be quite frank, what was really staggering was the speed. Like the adoption was insanely quick and to a very large scale, very, very, very quickly. And so I kind of felt when you bet on something, right, you feel that it's going to become important somehow, but I felt that it was going to be important and it actually was going to help solve problems in mechanics and in many other fields. But the speed at which it was adopted by so many people, that was still surprising. Yeah.
Hmm. What would you think is a determining factor of the speed of adoption? Is it really technological, or it was somewhat political implementation?
I think with like every technology, right, a lot has to do with the ease of use and adoption, right? The computer science community has done a really good job. And at that time, right, we're talking 2014, 15, the TensorFlow and Theano at the time, which was before TensorFlow, they were really kind of starting and they made things incredibly easy to implement and to use. And so, as an engineering community, right, when you start seeing that the tool is accessible, that makes a huge difference, right? Because then you can start thinking about it seriously and solving your own problems, and you don't need to be an expert in the actual topic. That's one. And then we also saw in that community that it could solve a lot of very, very difficult problems that for which there was very few parallel or alternative methods, right? So it's a mixture of it's a method that was helping in other domains and it was becoming easy to use. And that's an explosive combination, I think.
Yeah, well, interesting. Good intuition.
Yeah.
Hi, Jimmy.
Good morning or good evening or wherever you are.
Good evening, Jimmy. How are you?
Hello.
Hi, good, good. I'm actually in the US now.
You're in the US, I see.
Yeah, I'm taking a vacation over here.
I see. Good,
Mm.
good.
Very good.
Are you in the East Coast or West?
I'm in the middle.
In the middle, okay.
Actually in Champaign-Urbana, I need to take care of some of my uh, retirement issues or whatever. Yeah, but Mattia, can you make Miguel and Kaushik and some of these
Oh,
people co-host so they can?
absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to send you a message, but
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
No worries.
Now I changed the implementation. Unlike the previous one, people can join, don't need to be admitted.
okay.
I'm still learning, becoming an expert on Zoom, hopefully soon.
Perfect.
So can you share how, the background story on the rebooting of the EML webinars?
It's an interesting question. So it all started during the pandemic.
I remember. Yeah, super
Uh,
interesting talks.
right. So we were all stuck at home, and it was an idea from Zhigang, who said that we need to communicate, we need to talk to each other. So we came up with this idea of EML webinar, and it was actually initially. Uh, People were very enthusiastic. And we also had the format. So the speaker would give roughly about 1 hour-ish lecture. Then we will have a discussion. At the time, sometimes the discussion lasts uh, almost 2 hours. So
Right.
it was like almost like a Gordon conference type of environment. Uh, and now it goes back to more like normal type of format. Generally speaking, the discussion would not be as long, but
Hmm.
still there are a lot of interesting questions. Sometimes actually at the beginning, the young people participating in the webinar would ask career advices.
I see.
Well, at the beginning of the talk, not at the end, right?
Yeah, yeah, uh, yeah. We also decided that since people are joining in gradually, uh, before people join in, we can have a discussion, a chat about, the speakers' uh, background, what exactly, why he or she got into the field that what's so important, what's so interesting to the speaker. And then we thought that some of these conversations are very useful, but we need to record it in order for all the people to enjoy it. So we started to record all the webinars and made it available to the public. What was interesting was at one time we asked Elsevier to support this, to provide financial support for the webinars. Elsevier said no problem. However, they wanted every speaker during the webinar to provide a permission list or a disclosure permission saying that it's okay for elsewhere to own the
The image rights, if you
copyright
like.
and all these
Right.
things. We just couldn't do it
So the
because
speakers
we
wouldn't
don't know
allow?
who is going to speak.
I see.
Yeah. So all these sort of interesting development now Mattia is taking over. He's experiencing the challenges and the opportunities for the webinar. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Yeah. By the way,
Very
thank you
interesting.
so much for Miguel for giving this webinar. It's wonderful to have you.
It's a pleasure, Jimmy. Thank you for the invitation, of course.
Yeah,
It's really a pleasure.
yeah. And there have already been some people asking, for example, Antoine Jerusalem at Oxford University asked, he said he couldn't attend the webinar, but he wanted to have access to the recording.
Right.
He's very interested in the topic.
Yeah.
Mm,
So the
That's great.
plan is to publish on YouTube, right? Is we're kind of troubleshooting it at the moment.
yeah. Let me see
Or,
if
or
I
at least, I mean, it's being recorded, so definitely it's going to be accessible in one form or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I think that's really great.
audio.
What I'll cover today is pretty much the work of a student with me. There were a few important co-authors, but it's just one piece of the story. It's not gonna be one of those that I'm gonna be talking about everything that we do. I think Kaushik knows I like to keep it somewhat detailed, but hopefully without losing touch of the big picture. We will see.
I think that's an I certainly enjoy that style because one of the frustrations I have is we these days listen to a lot of short talks,
Right,
uh, and even seminars become really a series of short talks rather than
right.
a detailed exposition on an idea.
I
Exactly, yeah.
agree. I agree.
Which is fine. I mean, it's what it is. But I like to give enough to see if there's some questions and get into the details, if there's something wrong or different that could have been done.
Arguably, you need to go into the detail, right? If you want to spark a 3 hour discussion as you are proposing, Miguel, right?
3 hours. Right. Maybe there
I,
would be not enough complexity to get such a long discussion, but we will see.
yeah.
It's the Russian style seminar, right? Or Soviet style seminar.
Perhaps that would be a good time to start discussing your biography. So you could also give some career advice in the spirit of the previous version.
Sure. I can lead off. So Miguel, tell us a little bit about your early education before you came to the US and why you got interested in engineering and mechanics.
Yeah. So I am right now in University of Porto
Oh, you
because
are in Porto.
I
Okay,
am,
very good.
yes, I am in
Okay.
Portugal, and I wanted to come to the university just to make sure that we had enough, the internet
Oh,
was good
good.
enough.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm Portuguese. I was born and raised in Porto, and Portugal is a small country, so it's very common for you to stay in the hometown if you have a university close by.
Hmm.
But I always had a big passion for physics, so
Hmm.
I was probably going to become a physicist. But the engineering school in Porto is particularly strong, and it has very good conditions and so on. And so I had a visit to the engineering school, and the faculty that I met there, they were very, energetic about joining engineering, and that was it. So I ended up going into mechanical engineering. I do come from a very boring family of mechanical engineers, and that was a reason for me not to pick mechanical engineering. But in the end,
Great.
in the end, we got because My mother and my biological father are mechanical
Wow.
engineers, and my grandfather was a mechanical engineer, all of them from University of Porto. So in the end, I didn't, it was not very different.
Yeah, no, that
Yeah,
so they must be
but
extremely proud.
I'm not sure. I think my family is very low key. They don't give a lot of importance to,
Yeah, that's true. That's good. That's good.
yeah.
So then you came to Northwestern, and if I understand correctly, you started working with Ted Belichko, who was a giant. And unfortunately, Ted fell ill, suddenly fell ill, and passed away during your studies. So that must have been a very difficult time as a student, I can imagine.
Yeah, it was. I should say, so when I joined Northwestern, Ted had already
Okay,
had
so you
the
already had
accident. And
experience.
so it was actually the other way around. We already knew, and I was going to work with Wing Kamlu, which
I
I
see.
did. But it was interesting because so Wing asked me to give a group meeting with my master's work that I did with Pedro Camanho here at Porto.
Yeah.
And Ted was present in that particular group meeting. And it was I think it was very moving what happened next because by the end of my presentation, Ted looked at Wing and said, Wing, can you and Miguel talk to me for a moment here? And everyone left. And Ted looked at Wing and told him, Wing, I would like Miguel to be my last student if you don't mind.
I see. Okay.
And they were good friends. And Wing said, of course, that's obviously not a problem.
I see.
And
Interesting.
in the end, it was true. I ended up being his last student, you know.
Yeah. No, and it's yeah.
But I got very close to Ted. I used to go to his house because he was quite sick. So I actually
Mhm.
know his family very well, very nice people. And it was very special, you know. I didn't expect to gain anything from it. You know, I didn't do it because of that.
Mhm.
We didn't have a lot of technical discussions sometimes, but I learned the way that he approached science. I learned the way that he thought about problems, and in several occasions, he actually had very sharp technical comments as well. So it was very enriching, the
Mhm.
experience I had with him, and I cherish those times really, really a lot.
Mhm. I can imagine, and it must also be, I think it's quite a privilege to be asked to be someone's last student.
Yeah, I kind of felt the weight of that. I have to be honest.
Oh, it's certainly deserving. Then you came to Caltech and hid from me. I don't remember meeting you when you were at Caltech. Is that correct?
That is correct, Kaushik. It's true.
Yeah, that's right.
I I am very low key, you know. People at Brown say the same thing that I'm always in the office, you know,
Huh.
always with the door open, but I am, you know, I'm very quiet. I'm very timid, if you will.
Yeah. Um, and I'm just kind of going through your kind of chronologically, and then I'll come to the scientific side in a couple of minutes. You then spent time in Delft for about 4 years, was it? On and off?
5 years total, yeah.
5 years total, including the pandemic.
Yes.
Uh, so Delft, of course, has a great history in mechanics. So how was your experience there?
It was amazing. I loved TU Delft. I actually was not expecting to leave Delft at all. It happened, uh, you know, there was a nice contact by someone at Brown at the time. There was another university almost at the same time, actually, and I didn't apply or seek to leave. I really loved it there,
Hmm.
but Brown
Is
is
Brown.
Brown. And in the end, the offer was amazing, and I'm very happy with the move as well. I love Brown. They're very different institutions. Brown is very, very small, like Caltech. Delft is a huge place with pretty much all possible knowledge you can think of inside the
Sure.
campus.
Mhm. Sure.
And that makes it more inward looking in a way. This is not a critique, I think it's just an observation. Brown, because of its size, it has to be more outward looking and you have to collaborate oftentimes outside campus and things like that. But Delft is amazing. It really is amazing. It has a lot of expertise in many different places. The aerospace department is very far away, but we did reach out to them for in different moments, and I learned a lot. They take
Mhm.
good care of the young faculty that they have
They
there.
do.
They really do. It's a low pressure environment, which frankly I really appreciated. They were very patient with me. They let me be, less productive in the beginning of my career on purpose, and they were okay with it. I warned them what was going to happen. I was doing experiments at that time, and yeah, it was all good things to say about them. A wonderful experience.
Good. And you've been in Brown since 22, if I remember,
Yeah.
if I see correctly. Yeah. And I've always found Brown to be a fascinating place. Uh, almost as almost a lot of contradictions in some ways. It's a liberal arts university, but a small engineering school with an extraordinary legacy in our field. Um, so that must be an interesting experience. So let me ask you this about Brown. How much do you interact outside of engineering and outside of sciences? Because Brown has this amazing liberal arts history.
Yeah. The entire mindset at Brown is really about reaching out, no barriers. And I think one of the things that illustrates this very well, I think, is I know the provost quite well,
Mhm.
which probably would be unthinkable in most other universities. And I was completely surprised that it was so simple to have that happening. And engineering is actually undergoing a transformation right now, and we are actually thinking very deeply about integrating it more with
Mhm.
computer science, with planetary exploration, with geology as well. I'm part of a committee, which is very rare. I don't accept these sort of things, but we are really trying to make it even more interconnected and integrated. But in general, there's a high degree of collaboration, and I can speak to my colleagues as well. It's very common to, for example, applied math. We have a lot of connections with them. It's very close by
Yep.
as well. We go to
Yep.
their seminars and all of these things. So I would say that this is a big strength. And I recall from Caltech, it is the same thing. I used to go to physics talks and chemistry talks at Caltech, and it was right there. You just
Mhm.
have to cross the street.
Right.
And that's perhaps the thing that I love the most about these small places. It's really, really no barriers almost.
Mhm. So I don't want to take away from your time. We're approaching the hour, but I will ask you one last question about your experience. Um, you know, you've really have had an international career. You've kind of, and you have seen many different universities, many different systems of education. So perhaps I will, I'll ask you about what to reflect on that, especially with the view that there are young people here and should they be thinking about?
Yeah. Save the big question for the end, huh? Yeah, it's been a real privilege to see actually different systems. I think that the contrast between what happens in the Netherlands compared to the US, for example, it's very enriching to live on these two different realities. For
Mhm.
example, in the Netherlands, the connection, at least from an engineering perspective, the connection with industry is vital. It's absolutely vital. Most of the government grants involve explicitly the cooperation with industry, and that makes it much more practically minded. So things that you develop in the Dutch universities, they work, they're robust, they work very well because there's this pull from industry. That makes it sometimes harder to do the very fundamental work because you have to almost do it at the side. That was my personal experience. But it's very enriching to actually work with industry and understand their problems and understand what really matters. So that was something that was very somewhat surprising to me, but very interesting. In the US, it's much more friendly, much friendlier for the fundamental work. Of course, different administrations look at the problem in a different way, and there's more money sometimes to do fundamental work in some administrations than others. But overall, still, the idea is sometimes longer term and allowing to fail and just try to kind of do different things. And so again, I'm not saying it's better or worse. I think it's just very different, and it's very enriching, I think, to see the two sides, because sometimes getting things to work well is very, very difficult too. And it's not just better or worse, it's just different.
Thank you, Miguel. I won't do a kind of traditional introduction, but I think we've kind of walked over your background. With that, I will just hand it over to you and for your talk.
Thank you. So let's hope that you'll be able to see. Do you see the PowerPoint at the?
Yes.
Okay, great. This there. Okay, hopefully you can see the title slide and you can hear me well. Yes?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here today. It's really a pleasure to be part of these webinars. I've watched many of them in the past, and outstanding speakers, outstanding science. I hope I have something interesting for you to hear about today. This entire work is led by my former PhD student, Jiaxiang Yi, who's actually just started at Oxford, his postdoc. He's an outstanding researcher, an outstanding person. It was really a pleasure to work with him. And some co-authors that I will be listing in the slides as well. And as I was mentioning before, I like to keep more or less in the same topic and not give a panoply of different things in the same talk. But because I'm going to do that, I will just give you a very quick overview about what we do in the group and our interests in general. And it's very simple, really. We do machine learning development and optimization method development to try to solve solid mechanics problems. And sometimes we fall astray from that, but typically is method development for solid mechanics applications. And so we try to do this because we feel that working on applications actually opens up research questions at the fundamental level that require method development to solve new problems afterwards. That's at least the hope. And I will be very brief, but just so that you have an overview of the type of methods that we worked in the past that led to applications afterwards. or, for example, the self-consistent clustering analysis together with Zillian Liu. This was a work led by him. It's a method that I still consider the best work that I've ever participated in, because we were able to, I believe, for the first time, do simulations of representative volume elements of materials with plasticity without fitting parameters and transforming simulations from a week to a few seconds or a few minutes. And later on, we actually open sourced the code, and it's documented and so on. It's here in Crate, a work by Bernardo Ferreira. Same thing for the data-driven framework. We were lucky to be very early on in this literature to use machine learning and optimization to design new materials and structures. And we have this also open sourced, and it's actually, we tried to make it very well documented too, so that people can adopt it and so on. And we use this framework also to learn, we believe for the first time, using recurrent neural networks to learn the history-dependent behavior of materials, for example. So these are three different examples of methods that we worked on, and that we tried to be original about it. But these actually led to the possibility of actually designing metamaterials like the supercompressible metamaterial that you see here, but many other things like the spiderweb nanomechanical resonator that at the time broke the world record for highest quality factor, a work done with an absolutely amazing experimental colleague at TU Delft, Richard Norte, and his group. It's really been a pleasure to work with him. We worked with him on these amorphous nanostructured materials, and also nanomechanical resonators at the centimeter scale with multi-fidelity Bayesian optimization methods. Later on, we developed a light sail together with him. So this was a photonics problem. But really what I wanted to say today about all of this is that I think there's a big impact in not just developing methods in a vacuum, but actually using them to try to do new things on the application side, and vice versa. By trying to solve cutting-edge application problems, motivate the method development itself. I'm a firm believer in this, and I believe that we will be doing this for many years to come. But today, I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to talk about uncertainty quantification for artificial intelligence algorithms, which is a very interesting problem. And I want to start by motivating why uncertainty is so important for machine learning by showing you a video, okay? By Boston Dynamics. I hope you can hear the sound, and I'm going to be quiet for a little while. So the main message here is that when you're going to these big challenges of embodied AI, robotics, physical AI, it has to work in a world that is riddled with noise and scenarios away from the training data. And so I tried to come up with the simplest possible example to explain why uncertainty, why noise, and why extrapolation is so important. And it turns out that actually you can get the main picture by looking at the regression problem in 1D for a noisy function, okay? So imagine that you collect a bunch of samples, okay? There's lots of samples here on purpose. And when you look at this data, what it's really doing is hiding the truth behind it, the true process that led to this particular data. And there's a few things that we have to keep in mind. First, the heteroskedasticity, meaning the input-dependent noise. You see that there's less noise here and more noise there, but the noise is different everywhere. And this is actually usually true across the board for real problems. So no matter how much data I collect, and you see that I have a lot of points here, I cannot get rid of this noise. Okay, and this usually can come from measurements, it can come from many different sources, but this is pervasive across engineering and actually across life. And so this is what we call irreducible uncertainty or aleatoric uncertainty. I also have here two vertical bars that show you when I'm starting to extrapolate. So inside the bars, I'm interpolating the result, but outside of it, I have no idea how the function actually behaves. And so what you see is that the data is hiding the true function that it originates this data, right? And it turns out that if you knew the ground truth, this is how the function would really look like. The mean of the function would really look like, right? And if you also knew the ground truth of the distribution that leads to this noise that we see, in this case, it's a Gaussian distribution whose 95% credible interval is also indicated by these two dashed lines that you see here, right? And so what you see is that the noisy data that you collect is just the outcome of a process that you don't know, that has a particular distribution associated to it. And so what you can do is you can use, for example, a neural network or any other sort of regression technique deterministically. And that's what most people do. And when you do that, you get, for example, the green line. And so no matter what you're doing, if you're doing regression, you're going to do a regression for the expected value, meaning the mean, the average of your data. And so what the fitting will do is try to just find this mean response that you see here. But of course, what you see is that it's overconfident away from the training data, right? And you have no idea about the error that you're making in these extrapolatory regimes. And for that matter, also, even for the interpolatory part, you don't know how good your model really is. And so the entire talk of today is basically about a method that we created that is called variance estimation Bayesian neural networks, VEBNNs, where we actually try to do everything. We try to learn the mean response in the solid dash, in the solid blue line that you see here, the uncertainty about the mean prediction. So that's the shaded blue region that you see here. You see that it's high on the extrapolatory part because we're very uncertain of the prediction, and actually quite low inside the data because I have so much data that I can be very confident about the prediction that I make. But crucially, also being able to predict the noise itself. And you see that in the dashed, in the shaded orange part, we are predicting the noise in the data, even away from the training data. And so this is what we call the disentanglement of noise with error. So we disentangle epistemic uncertainty, which is the prediction of the error that we make, the dashed or the shaded blue part, from the actual noise that you cannot reduce that is inherent to your data that you have there, which is represented as an orange shaded part. And so what I'm going to try to do is, and if you're bored, you can log off right away. So this is basically the method. And now you can ask Claude or Codex to just download our repo, which is open source, and you can use it for all you care. If, however, you're interested in understanding what the method does and why it does, then you'll have to stick around for a few more minutes, and that's the second part of the talk. So I'm going to talk now about the development of these VEBNNs and why uncertainty disentanglement is such a difficult problem. And so, very interestingly, until this year or the late last year, no method has actually successfully demonstrated that we could disentangle uncertainty at scale. And so in essence, like I said, we have data with aleatoric uncertainty or noise, right? That's what we discussed just moments ago, that typically it's heteroscedastic, it's input dependent. And then we have the epistemic uncertainty that comes from fitting different models. For example, if I have the same neural network model, just by randomizing the weights in the beginning, right, just by the optimization dynamics, I can fit the same network 3 times to the same data, and I'm going to get 3 different responses, right? And the fact that I get different responses is explained by this epistemic uncertainty. My model has an error and the fit is not perfect because the model is over-parameterized, right? This in principle is reducible. If you have a better model, then you'll be more certain. You'll have a lower error that you're making in your prediction. And so What is very interesting, and I have to say that we got very lucky, because just a few months before we put our work in the archive, there was this beautiful paper that says front and center in the abstract that we find that despite recent theoretical endeavors, no existing approach provides pairs of disentangled uncertainty estimators in practice. And this is published in NeurIPS, which is one of the most respected venues in computer science. And it's a very thorough, very interesting study where they basically show models cannot distinguish between these two types of uncertainty. And so 6 months later, we've been working on this for 4 years, actually. We proposed a solution that we think actually really does it. But before, let me try to explain why is it that it's so difficult to actually have the disentanglement of the different types of uncertainties. So, broadly speaking, a scalable method for uncertainty quantification is Bayesian neural networks, okay? And so the way that we're going to think about the problem is very simple. Let's assume that you're trying to make a prediction y, and your model is f of x, but you're trying to find the mean ground truth, the dashed line before, but there is noise in the data. And this is the noise that comes from S of x that, for example, could come from a Gaussian distribution, but it can come from other types of distributions too. And so a Bayesian neural network, what it does is basically make predictions, but assuming that every parameter in the model follows a distribution instead of being a deterministic single value for that parameter. I'm talking about the weights and the biases of the neural network, okay? So if you're not familiar with Bayes' rule, I'm not going to go into too much detail into it, but you can ask me questions later on. In essence, what you're doing is you have a distribution for your parameters theta. P of theta is this distribution. For example, assume a Gaussian. And you assume a distribution for your likelihood. This is basically the distribution that you assume for your data, okay? Which could be, for example, another Gaussian. And then the only thing you're doing is you're using Bayes' rule to update the distribution of the weights, given that you saw the data that you're observing. Okay, so you're basically using the prior and the likelihood to update the distribution of the weights to reflect the data that you have observed. And so the prior typically is assumed to be Gaussian, but it can be anything really. And the likelihood, in this case, we're going to assume it to be Gaussian as well, but later on you'll see that we'll generalize this as well. Now, very importantly is that this likelihood distribution, this Gaussian, has to have a mean that is what we're going to predict. Our prediction will be an update for the mean, but it also is associated to a variance. Okay, and this variance is what we call aleatoric uncertainty. Now, I have to say that there's a lot of confusion in the literature, but hear me out. The variance of the likelihood is, without any doubt, the aleatoric uncertainty model. Okay, it's the model you have for the aleatoric uncertainty, for the noise in your problem. And then if you have all of this, you find the predictive posterior distribution by taking the integral of your likelihood when you observe the data times the posterior, okay? And this integral is very difficult to compute. But in the case of a Gaussian prior and a Gaussian distribution, the integral of the posterior is basically given, if you take the log of the posterior, you get this expression. This is basically what you get if your likelihood is a Gaussian and your prior is also a Gaussian. And typically, okay, you don't think about this. If you do training of neural networks and you don't care about uncertainty, you don't care about the Bayesian perspective, you don't think about the full expression for the posterior. So hold that thought and we'll get back to this in a moment. But the full expression, if you fully define the model, involves this entire expression here, okay? And then you have to take this and find the integral to make your final prediction in such a way that you have the aleatoric prediction and the mean prediction, and then the integral of all the parameters that are possible in the model will introduce your epistemic prediction. So the prediction of the error that of the model that you just obtained, okay? So in essence, the message that I have for you is that if you train a neural network and follow a Bayesian procedure, theoretically, you can get the mean, the aleatoric uncertainty, and the epistemic uncertainty all at once, okay? The problem is that actually doing this in practice is extremely difficult. In fact, in practice, there's very little success, as that paper by Mochani mentioned before. And so if you were to do and apply this strategy to the data that I showed you before, oftentimes what you see is a trade-off between the mean prediction, the epistemic prediction, and the aleatoric uncertainty. And all of these predictions are kind of conflated. They're all mediocre, if you will. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to break this down into 3 steps, okay? And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to connect with people that are deterministic about training neural networks, okay? So if you're doing just standard training of a neural network for a regression problem, you are assuming that your weights are deterministic. There's no distributions anymore involved. And what that is really is just taking the expression for your log posterior and assuming that the aleatoric uncertainty is constant, then all the terms that are in black, they drop, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to just minimize the negative of this expression here in the red part to find the parameters that minimize the negative of the posterior, okay? And so that's, you may not realize that that's what you're doing, but when you're training a deterministic neural network, you're just minimizing the negative of this expression. And that's why you don't see these black terms most of the time, because they're constant. They don't participate in the minimization, okay? So the problem here is that when you're finding the minimum of an expression that has millions of parameters, you don't get into the global minimum, you get into a local minimum. And that's why when you train a neural network, you find parameters that usually are a local minimum or a Bayesian in this loss function. The loss function is just a negative of the posterior, okay? And so that's why you can fit multiple models, and if you optimize this expression, you're going to get multiple different values for the weights that sometimes have very similar performance inside the data distribution, okay? And so this is used by everyone. It's very easy to train. There's no integrals. The only thing you're doing is optimization. So you take the gradient of this expression and find the minimum. But it's difficult to tune the hyperparameters, so how many neurons, how many layers in a network, and so on and so forth. And of course, crucially, you're only estimating the mean response. You have no idea about the uncertainty. But this is what pretty much everyone does in practice, okay? Now, if you were interested in predicting the aleatoric uncertainty, there's a paper from 1994, okay? 1994, that actually tells you how to do it. And they say, okay, just take the posterior, consider the full posterior, and now optimize not just for the mean, okay? Optimize the parameters not just for the mean, but also for the best fit, including the variance of the distribution. And so typically you go there and you now have to do the optimization for this expression, but now both for the mean and the variance of your data. And the problem is that the actual optimization of this problem is very, very nasty. And if you're curious, we can save some time in the end to discuss how nasty this optimization problem is, but there's actually multiple things that make it difficult. And I will be brushing them off right now. For now, I just want you to take this at face value. There are many papers that report that this method does not work, okay? So it's like I said before, you get a mediocre prediction for the mean and a mediocre prediction for the aleatoric uncertainty, and it's very difficult to actually get this done. Some people introduce hyperparameters to try to balance the loss and so on, but it's actually quite tricky to train the network to do this. And I want to point out, very importantly, this is still deterministic training. I'm just finding the parameters that lead to the best mean prediction and the best variance prediction deterministically. There's no Bayesian inference involved here. I hope this is clear. So theoretically, you could get both the mean and the variance, but in practice, it's actually very difficult to train, and it does not work well. Okay, but let's assume that it does work well, okay? What you can do is what I said before, you could still take this expression and do Bayesian inference. Now, if you're not familiar with what Bayesian inference is, let me tell you in a very short manner what the difference is. So If you're doing optimization, so deterministic models, you're just finding the minimum of the negative of this expression. So it's just an optimization problem, a minimization problem. And your hope is to get to the global optimum that, frankly, you never get to. If you're doing inference, it's a much harder problem. What you're trying to do is actually sample the entire distribution. So it's not just taking derivatives and getting to the minimum point. It's actually to know all of it, right? This way, you have all possible parameters of your model, which means that you know the uncertainty because you know all possible predictions that you can make from that particular model. That's why this allows you to infer the epistemic uncertainty of the model. Of course, in theory, this is much more powerful than the deterministic training because you have a model that has obviously also the minimum, right? So you can make the best prediction for the mean, but also you are actually annealing the mean in the case where you don't have data and increasing the uncertainty, making your prediction faithful, accurate, and with a quantification of the error that you have. Okay, so theoretically speaking, like I said, you could integrate this expression, you can sample this expression, predict the mean, predict the aleatoric uncertainty, and also predict the epistemic uncertainty, again, the error associated to integrating all possible aspects of the model. But the problem is that that does not work. And so unless you have a very powerful inference strategy, in practice doing inference is very difficult, even when you don't have aleatoric uncertainty. It's extremely difficult when you also want to learn for the aleatoric uncertainty. So I hope this is clear so far. And so what I'm going to do now is an engineering solution that I think is actually quite principled for this problem. And so our idea was very, very, very simple. We said, okay, wait a minute. Everyone in the literature is already doing this first part here. Everyone is doing training deterministically. So we make predictions of the neural network that is capturing the mean. Whether you believe that it's the mean or you think about it or not, it doesn't matter. That's what you're doing. You're predicting the mean of your data when you're doing regression. And this works. Empirically, it works. Everyone knows even self-driving cars are being trained deterministically, right? So this is something that works well, especially inside the distribution in interpolation regimes. So why not doing that? Just do that without all the other complications. Then freeze your prediction for the mean and learn the aleatoric uncertainty, assuming that the mean prediction you make was correct. And as you will see, it works like a charm. Then the actual optimization of the aleatoric uncertainty alone is very easy, actually. And especially we did a little tweak to do it. Once you obtain a prediction for the aleatoric uncertainty, in other words, once you obtain the distribution for your noise, then do the full Bayesian inference, warm starting it with the deterministic prediction for the mean that you had, but freezing the noise prediction that you made before. This way, you make a new prediction for the mean and the uncertainty associated to the mean that you see here for the frozen aleatoric uncertainty. And if you're not happy with that, then just iterate and update the aleatoric uncertainty and then make the prediction for the mean and the epistemic uncertainty. Very simple strategy. And so I just presented this work in the ICML conference in AI last week in South Korea, and there were quite a few people on the poster, and most of them said, I cannot believe how simple this strategy really is, but it makes perfect sense after you see it. And it really, really does work. So let me try to illustrate this as best as possible. So again, let's say that you do the separation of the mean and the aleatoric uncertainty prediction. So you take your posterior and you're optimizing for the two things. But now optimizing this Gaussian posterior for all the parameters is quite difficult, like I mentioned. And I'm going to give you briefly the reason for it. When you take the gradients with respect to your mean, you get this expression. But when you take the gradients with respect to the variance, you get a more complex expression that has higher order terms. So your gradients are unbalanced. Worst, we found out that the shape of the loss with respect to the last layer is a saddle. So the loss is a saddle shape. And if you know anything about optimization, you don't like saddle shapes for your optimization problem. And so both the gradients are not balanced and the shape of the loss that you're optimizing is very complex. Therefore, you cannot get to a good optimum. And so these explain briefly why is it that the problem cannot be solved all at once, even without epistemic uncertainty, just for the mean and aleatoric uncertainty. But if you separate the two, as you see here, you get a decent prediction for the mean inside the distribution of the data, and then finding the noise is actually quite simple. We actually also propose the gamma likelihood loss. If you're interested, we can discuss this. That makes the convergence of the second step even faster, like really, really fast. Okay, so this works quite well. And then you go there and you take the same posterior, and now you're going to sample this, right? Remember, Bayesian is about taking integrals, not derivatives. And so you freeze the aleatoric uncertainty that we find in step 2, and you just do Bayesian inference for this expression, which is what you do standardly for all Bayesian neural networks anyway. Okay? And now the way that you do inference is up to you. It could be with MCMC, variational inference methods, you name it. In the paper, we considered most of them, the ones that we could do. And so our point is not about what inference method that you choose. Our point is to separate so that this cooperative training is beneficial for all inference methods. Okay? And so in the paper, we actually considered 18 data sets. Okay? So we solved the problem for 18 different problems. We said multidimensional, heteroscedastic, small and large data sets, image problems, regression problems for standard cases, history dependent. So different architectures, feed forward, convolutional, recurrent, etc. Different inference methods and 18 different data sets. And what we saw is that the cooperative strategy that we proposed was beneficial pretty much for all methods, all architectures, and all inference strategies. Okay? It was never worse. And when it was by a small margin. Okay? I'm not going to hammer you with 18 different data sets and all of those results. They are in the paper. You're welcome to look into here or ask me questions. What I would like to do is to focus now on the problems that we're trying to solve with this particular method. And so now what I'm going to show you is what can we do with this variance estimation Bayesian neural network method that we proposed. And before doing that, what I want to do is I want to focus on the types of problems that we care in mechanics by focusing on a very specific problem, but this is transversal to many other problems. And if you know anything about my group, you know that we like constitutive modeling, and that's why we follow Kaushik's paper so closely as well. So what we're going to focus on is the ability to predict the entire response of a material that is complex. Okay, so in this case, it's a composite, heterogeneous with lots of detail there. And in this problem, you can solve it in many different ways. You can do experiments for the material. You go to the lab, you do an experiment. Or you can do finite element simulations, what we call direct numerical simulations for big representative volume elements of the material. These are very time consuming. Big elements, plasticity, fracture, lots of complications. So these take sometimes hours and many times days in supercomputers. Or you can use reduced order models, like our SCA method that I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, or any other reduced order model that will be less accurate, but that will make the predictions much faster, okay, for the same process. And still using big representative volume elements, or you can go even further and do predictions on stochastic volume elements or statistical volume elements. So these are small elements of the microstructure that once you randomize the microstructure, you get a different response, unlike what happens for a representative volume element that is big enough that you can randomize inside and your response is still the same. But reducing the volume element makes it even quicker to make the predictions. And so pay attention to the notation. A straight bar on top means that this is a deterministic prediction. So it's a single line in your prediction. Okay, there's no variation. And if there's a tilde in the top of the word, that means that it's stochastic. So if you randomize the microstructure, you actually get different responses like you see here, for example, okay? And of course, the ground truth is always the experiment, except for the actual person that does the experiments, right? And the computational models are always what we try to do to make the predictions, and they always have an error. So in essence, it's a trade-off between the cost of your prediction, the presence of noise in your model or your data, and the accuracy of your model that you have. All these three things are trade-offs. You can never get all of them at once. And usually our community focuses on deterministic problems, okay? And so a single fidelity deterministic problem is something that we focused on some time ago in 2016, 2019, where you take a representative volume element, you stretch the material in different paths, so you can do tension and shear, compression, all sorts of combinations. Then you calculate the average stress, and the name of the game is, provided a new deformation state for the material, can you predict the corresponding stress? And we showed some time ago that you can use recurrent neural networks to make a prediction that is history dependent, because materials, if you stretch them and then shear them, or if you shear them first and then stretch them, you may end up in the same deformation state at the end, but your stress response will be different because it depends on the full path to get to that state. And recurrent neural networks capture that. And nowadays, there's excellent work from many other people that have proposed additional differences in the architectures. Okay, so the point that I want to make here is we want to make the prediction of a new deformation state, and we want to predict the stress that corresponds to that state, and that is history dependent. But this was doing this for a single fidelity model. So there's only one type of model, one scale. And the model was deterministic because the RVE was big enough. Okay? What I want to talk today is what happens when we have uncertainty. Okay? So if you lower the size of your volume element, so if now these are smaller, if you change the microstructure inside, you actually see a big variation of your predicted stresses. It's not the same stress anymore. There's variation. And so what you have to keep in mind is if it was a RVE, you have this black line, solid black line, deterministic. But if you have different SVEs, you have the dashed lines over there. And you see a big dispersion, a big variability of your prediction. Okay? And so, of course, you probably already foresaw this. Our variance estimation Bayesian neural network method is able to learn, using a recurrent neural network as an architecture, is able to learn not just the mean prediction of your data, but also the noise. That's what you see on the left. And I should say the dashed black line is the ground truth mean. The dashed dots are the 95% credible interval. And these are the predictions we make with 100 paths. Okay, so just 100 samples. We are making the prediction of the mean fairly well. And you see that there's an error there. And our prediction of the noise is bigger than the real noise that you see there. But what I really like about this is you see on the right, this is the epistemic uncertainty. So the model is telling me, okay, my mean prediction is the solid orange line, but I'm uncertain about this part. And you see here that the epistemic uncertainty is large in the right place. Indeed, this is where we have the biggest error, and small in the place where we actually are very close to the ground truth. So our method is able to distinguish and disentangle the actual noise in the data from the error that we make on the mean prediction. But what I like even more is as we refine the number, as we increase the number of data points, now from 100 paths we go to 800 paths, you see that we are converging on the aleatoric uncertainty, and our epistemic uncertainty is lower, and the mean prediction is getting better. And as you increase even more, now you see that we're basically spot on. We basically have found the noise and found out that our mean prediction is almost perfect with very little uncertainty. right? And so this is demonstrating that we not only can separate the prediction of uncertainties, but that we can confidently converge to the right prediction for the mean, for the noise, and for the prediction of the error, okay? And so we did this very carefully with 5 different metrics for the prediction. If you're curious, we can talk about these metrics in great detail, but in essence, what you see is that the mean is getting to a lower and lower error as we increase the number of data points, the training data. The aleatoric uncertainty is also converging. So if it was 0, it would be perfect. And all 3 metrics for epistemic uncertainty, so for the error of the model, are getting into the theoretical best. So basically getting perfect prediction for the epistemic uncertainty, okay? And so what we see is that our VE-BRNN, so the variance estimation Bayesian recurrent neural network, is capable of predicting the mean as good as the deterministic recurrent neural network, but it predicts all the other things that we discussed before as well. Okay? So the question that I want to ask now is, what if the data that we have is multi-fidelity? Okay? In other words, what if now I collect some samples from experiments and I collect some samples from a reduced order model that have different accuracies and different speed? Maybe I can collect a few experiments, but I cannot collect as many as I can do in a computer. So if you have a data set that has all these mixed sources of the data, can we still do it? And the answer is yes. And I should say that in the multi-fidelity literature in machine learning, there's a lot of developments. We did not invent this literature at all, but we unified the formulation for machine learning, for multi-fidelity machine learning methods, by explaining that in essence, the only thing you need in multi-fidelity is the low fidelity model, a transfer learning model, G, that transfers the low fidelity model to the high fidelity data, and then a model that stitches the difference between the error, the residual. And so we just basically, there's a lot of papers that don't formulate it in this way, and we believe that this is the most general and simplest way to understand it. You have a low fidelity model, you transport that model into the high fidelity data, and then the error, the remaining error that you have is a learnable model for the residual, okay? And so we can do this with Gaussian processes, with linear regression, with all sorts of models, and going all the way until to Bayesian neural networks, and of course, variance estimation Bayesian neural networks like we introduced. And so in essence, what you can do is you can mix models too. You can have a deep neural network, so deterministic model for the low fidelity, and a Bayesian neural network for the high fidelity, if you only care about uncertainty of the high fidelity, or vice versa. Okay, and so what we did was come up with a flow chart that tries to explain what are the modeling decisions you need to make for any problem. This has nothing to do with constitutive modeling. This is applicable for any problem that you're trying to do learning. And so do you need multi-fidelity? Yes, you do. So then you have to define your transfer learning model, however simple. Oftentimes people are using linear regression without even knowing it. And choose the residual model for fusing the 2 fidelities. And then you train the next fidelity, and if you're not happy, you can add more fidelities as you go. And then you have to choose the architecture for each part of the model. And so are you Bayesian or not? Do you care about uncertainty? Yes. Do you have history dependency? Yes. Okay. Do you want to disentangle uncertainties? Then you end up with a VE-BRNN method. So all I want to say here is that we don't need to use the VE-BRNN if you're not interested in disentangling uncertainties, in doing uncertainty quantification. That's kind of the tip of the spear. If you want to do something simpler, just go deterministic and you're perfectly fine in doing that as well. You may not need multi-fidelity as well. So it's just trying to hopefully guide you towards what you should choose for the different problems that you have. Okay, so we solved a bunch of different cases with different types of fidelities, noise in the low fidelity, noise in the high fidelity, no noise at all, lots of data, data scarce. I'm going to be very brief, and I'm going to just focus on the SCA method for the low fidelity. Okay, so we're using the self-consistent clustering analysis, this fast prediction of the RVE. And the SCA method can have different levels of approximation. You have to choose the clusters, the number of clusters that you use for your approximation. The only thing I want you to focus on is that if I discretize my SCA method with more clusters, I get closer and closer to the actual ground truth data. But I also am much slower. You see here that I can go from a few seconds to minutes or even hours if I have a lot of clusters, okay? So of course, the idea is to use few clusters, very quick predictions, lots of data, and then have a high fidelity model for the key data points and therefore learn the full behavior of my material, okay? And so that's the idea. In multi-fidelity, that's what you do. You have data that you collect. It can be noisy or it can be noiseless. But this data is not perfect, okay? So for example, you can use the SCA to predict some quantity of interest. It could be, toughness, for example. But that prediction will be wrong because the actual ground truth, the high fidelity process, will be a different response. But it probably contains a correlation to that response. It has characteristics of the prediction that can be useful for learning. And so the idea is to then just use a few points at the high fidelity, maybe, 4 points as you see here, and transport the information from the low fidelity and make the final prediction. And what you see here, this is a toy problem, but just so you know, you see that the ground truth is this red solid line. This is what you would get from a high fidelity single fidelity model. So if you have only 4 points, this is the fit that you can do. But if you have the same 4 points and more points at the low fidelity, you can actually get very, very close to the real process that you have at the fraction of the cost, because these low fidelity points are very quick to determine. I hope the multi-fidelity aspects are clear if you're not familiar with this. And so what we showed is that we can have much quicker predictions, with the same compute, we can actually have lower error very quickly compared to the single fidelity at the same cost. So you may be able to collect more high fidelity points, but you collect a lot more low fidelity points. And the point that I want to make, because every time you hear a talk and they tell you that everything works, don't believe it. I want to point out that multi-fidelity is not black magic. If your low fidelity is very low quality, you have a lot of points, but they're very low accuracy, maybe the gain that you have, you see, is little. It's a little bit here, and actually, for higher budgets, it can actually be even worse to have the multi-fidelity. So there's always trade-offs. It's not magic, right? You want a fast prediction, but that is as close as possible to the real process. And if it deviates too much, then collecting low fidelity data may actually hurt your prediction. And you have to be careful in the way that you choose the samples in low and high fidelity. I hope that this is clear. And to wrap up the talk, I want to talk to you about something that is not published. We are actually submitting it very soon, but it's a project that actually took us 5.5 years without a single paper, but that finally is going to come out, hopefully soon. And it's a problem that I find fascinating, okay? So imagine that what you want to do is to design a sustainable plastic, okay? And so imagine that you have PP and PE, polyethylene and polypropylene. These are the two most common polymers in the world. And it's a very interesting system. There's a science paper from 2017 that is fascinating, where they showed that if you put together PE and PP just like that, you get, instead of a 300% strain, 800% strain at break, you get 10% strain at break. You see here, because PP and PE don't like each other. They're immiscible. So they become very brittle. The bonding is very weak, okay? But in that same paper, they showed that if you add compatibilizers, meaning a chemical that is actually a mixture of PE and PP in a very clever way, you basically glue the two phases together, okay? And now you start having better composites. You see that they're starting to break later. But the paper, if you read the paper, they basically did an exhaustive experimental study and very little conclusions. They didn't know what worked well. How much PP should I add? How much compatibilizer? What compatibilizer should it be? The process is not very clear. What is happening mechanically to this material? Okay. So of course we were very interested to see, okay, this is a perfect problem for our VEBNN strategy. In fact, we had to develop the VEBNN strategy to solve the problem in the first place. So I hope that you understand exactly what I'm going after. So hear me out. So imagine that you're changing the volume fraction of the PP. So you're adding PP to the system, and then you're doing a prediction. You go to the lab and you make these stress strain tests. But because the material is recyclable, you don't know the sources of the material. So you take the same material and you do 5 different tests. You have a huge uncertainty of your property. Because as you know, recycled materials, they come from everywhere. You don't know exactly what is inside the material. And this problem sometimes got even worse when you added a compatibilizer for the same materials. Sometimes the variability became even bigger, okay? So the question is, as we change the properties of the system, add a new compatibilizer, change the stiffness of the materials, increase the volume fraction, sometimes your uncertainty is low, as you can see in this part here, or it could be very high, as you see in this part here, right? But what is interesting is, imagine that you're trying to optimize the system. And imagine that this is toughness, so you want higher toughness, but you want to deploy this material and you want to make sure that when you deploy it, it breaks in the right place. So when you're optimizing a very uncertain material, you don't optimize for the mean prediction, you optimize for the lower bound, right? Because you want to deploy the system and you want to make sure that the material will not break with 95% confidence, right? And what you see here, it's very interesting in this illustration, this is just an illustration, you see that actually this is the optimal point. Even though the mean prediction is much higher for a different design, maybe a very high volume fraction, there's a lot of uncertainty and the lower bound is lower than the lower bound for that particular design, making the design problem extremely interesting, right? The design point, the optimal point shifts dramatically because of the noise in your data, okay? So that's what we did. But in order to do that, we had to do very careful finite element simulations of the process, okay? So this is the microstructure that we simulated by comparing with microstructures from the literature. And we made the model fairly predictive. So this is the experiments, and this is our SVEs in blue. And you see that we actually capture fairly well the full stress strain behavior, including the prediction for the fracture, the onset of fracture. And then, of course, because we have a computational model, you can change the Young's modulus of the compatibilizer, for example. We can change the volume fraction of the PP, the volume fraction of the compatibilizer. We can play with the system and get different answers. And sure enough, our statistical volume elements also showed that for some systems you have very high variability, for others you have less, and all the properties change. The failure point changes, the toughness changes, and so on and so forth. And of course, if you then want to do design after you learn the system, you have to design for the tail end, the lower tail of the distribution of your property. So if you compute the area below this curve, okay, every curve that you see here would have a different toughness because the integral of the curve has different values. If you then create the histogram, you'll see this is the toughness. You see that this has a very large distribution, and worst, it's not even Gaussian most of the times. Sometimes it's close to a Gaussian, sometimes it's actually a much more complex distribution that you see here. And the 5% quantile is quite far from the mean of your distribution. So you want to design for this 5% quantile that we see over here. I hope this is clear. And of course, to wrap up the talk, we always have to end up on a positive note. But frankly, I have to say, I was blown away by the accuracy of the model. So what you see here in the dots are the mean prediction of the property, but then in the orange bars and the blue bars, the orange bar is what we predict the noise to be. Okay, the 95% confidence interval. Note that sometimes it's not symmetric because it's not Gaussian. And the blue bar is the corresponding ground truth distribution that we obtain by brute force. It's not in the training data. I should say that the training data doesn't have the same prediction for the same input. We only see one sample per input, per configuration of the system. And we find the noise everywhere with staggering conversions, to be honest. And so what we see here is you see in blue is the prediction that we have for the noise, the aleatoric uncertainty, and you see in black and red the prediction for our mean, and in red the epistemic uncertainty for the mean prediction. So what you see is that we hug the prediction of our mean and that it contains the ground truth in a distribution for the noise that is huge, you see? So we nail the mean, we nail the epistemic uncertainty, and we are able to predict the full aleatoric uncertainty of points that we didn't see. I have to be clear, these are all test points. We haven't seen in the data any of these points. And of course, once we have the model like this, you can then do optimization and ask, okay, what is the configuration of the inputs that leads to the highest toughness at the 5% quantile? And we were very, very, very pleased to see, again, this is not seen, this is unseen data, that once you look at the simulations for different SVEs, we see that the one that the VEBNN tells us that has the highest 5% quantile toughness, so the highest low value for the toughness, is actually the SVE that diffuses damage. You see that actually the damage propagation is diffuse in the actual RVE. And so to conclude the talk, I just want to say that we have the method. The method is open source. You are very welcome to use Claude or Codex or Gemini to download the code. And we really believe that you can actually deploy this in systems that have small data sets, large data sets, non-Gaussian noise, Gaussian noise, with or without it, and actually disentangle uncertainties and make better predictions for the actual response that you get for the mean. We generalized learning from single fidelity to multi-fidelity with or without history dependency, with or without uncertainty disentanglement. And now we're hoping to apply the method to different problems, including design of sustainable materials that I gave you a preview, and the paper will be submitted very soon. But we're also looking into scalable Bayesian optimization and active learning, which is a very difficult topic and very interesting, I think, for design problems. I hope this was not too boring. The two main papers for this talk are here. They were led by Jiashang Yi, who was a fantastic student. We had a blast with these projects, and I hope you have questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you for this excellent talk.
Thank you.
There are many colorful ways of saying this, but I will use the more polite version of about the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. So uncertainty is very important. So with that, I think I'll like to open it up for questions from the audience. I would, if there are any, I see one hand raised, Sukanya.
Hi, Miguel. Thank you for your talk. It was really inspiring and I enjoyed it a lot. So you talked about predicting the onset of failure mechanisms.
So can I interrupt for a second? Do you mind giving us a one-sentence introduction to yourself so that we
Of
know?
course. I'm a mechanical engineer graduate student at Polytechnic Montreal, Canada. So I'm in the second year of my PhD, and I'm working on reconfigurable structures, like the design of reconfigurable structures.
Great.
So my work is more on instabilities, so I was very curious about that. I wonder if you're predicting mechanical instabilities as well, like snapping or buckling patterns.
Thank you for your question, and nice to meet you too. In these problems that I showed here, no, but in past work, we were designing for buckling. And I'm actually very glad that you mentioned that, because as you know, you're in the field, you may know this better than I do. When you do have instabilities, right, uncertainty is absolutely the most important thing, right? Because a small imperfection can lead to a gigantic difference in the response, right? And so actually, the entire motivation for my group to work on uncertainty came from studying buckling phenomena. But the actual results that I showed today were about fracture and plasticity, which can also be imperfection sensitive, but not to the point of unstable processes like the one that I'm showing here. Does this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but I believe that the method can be applied there, and you can quantify what's the impact of these inputs on the outputs, and even vice versa. You can actually also do the inverse problem with methods like this in the future. I think it would be a wonderful thing to do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Mao Winning? I'm sorry if I
Hi.
didn't say your name correctly.
Yeah, it's okay. It's correct. Thank you so much. So I'm a mechanical engineering student in the Nanyang Technology University. So I'm really interesting topic. So I just want to ask.
By the way, Wei-Ning, this is Jimmy Xia, interrupting you. Sorry. Wei-Ning
Sorry.
is a student of Yifan Wang at NTU, and myself. We're co-advisors of Wei-Ning.
Ah, great.
Yeah. So yeah, basically previously I have also done some work on using the Bayesian optimization to optimize the shape of the particle, the granular particles. So if I want to describe all those shapes, I need a lot of parameters. The dimension of the optimization is very, very large. Uh, I have encountered problems on this. My question is, have you ever like encountered some problem on like a large optimization dimension, or do you have any methods to like overcome this challenge?
Yes, thank you for that question. So you might not know, but actually I've been using Bayesian optimization for many years now. It's an amazing method. We were very early adopters of the method, and we tried to propose it as much as possible because it's a fantastic method. It's very robust.
Yeah.
It's very simple to use, and it works very, very well. All of these works here use Bayesian optimization, one form or another. But as you know very well, it is limited in terms of the scalability that you have. And so
Yeah.
you are only able to handle small dimensional problems. Some people argue that you can do high dimensional, but small number of samples, okay? Precisely why we are looking into Bayesian neural networks so carefully, because they are more difficult to train, much more difficult to train than a Gaussian process, but they can be scalable. And so if you train them very carefully, you can do Bayesian optimization with variance estimation Bayesian neural networks, or even Bayesian neural networks as well at scale. And this is why at the end of the presentation, so you read my mind, basically. This is exactly what we are developing. Scalable Bayesian optimization and active learning using this method. And it's possible. We actually have preliminary data. I just want to say one more thing, which is the training of the networks, of the Bayesian neural networks, is slow. And so there are still problems that making it scalable, Bayesian neural networks might not be the best way to do it. And so faster methods random Fourier features, for example, in neural networks and so on, may be a better solution as well. Does this answer your question?
Okay, that's really like very inspiring. Because I'm having this problem, I can also try all those methods, but I will also try the base of optimization method as you have said. And thank you for your answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. Thank you.
Audrey Olivier.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Miguel, for the talk. I'm Audrey Olivier. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Southern California in the Department of Civil Engineering. My question is about the Bayesian inference piece. In methods like GPs, which are like Bayesian machine learning methods, the choice of prior kernel and optimization of like hyperparameters of the prior is very important, especially for like predicting uncertainty away from training data. So I was wondering if in your methods the prior matters, and how does that work in those methods? Yeah.
It's nice to meet you, Audrey. I've read your papers, so it's nice to put a face to the papers. Yes, so it's a great question. The prior is always very important. As you mentioned, the prior is our prior belief of what the data should look like. And if your prior belief is wrong, then your convergence is going to be slower. Of course, as we know, if you have infinite data or a large amount of data, you wash out the prior and the prior doesn't matter anymore. But as you mentioned, when you're extrapolating, you revert back to the prior. And so absolutely, the prior is a very important aspect in the modeling decisions. And the method that I'm showing here suffers from all the advantages and disadvantages of standard Bayesian methods, including Gaussian processes, Bayesian neural networks. There's nothing that is different from that respect. And as you mentioned, GPs, Gaussian processes, are amazing methods because you can do inference exactly. And so therefore, all of this stuff that you see here is not needed because you integrate it analytically, but you need a Gaussian likelihood, a Gaussian prior, and you cannot disentangle uncertainties as well with an exact model. So once you go to these more complex problems, there's really no other way that I know that you can actually tackle them. And that's when you start bringing in these inference methods. And I have to say, they matter a lot. And that's why there's so many of them, because most people, I hope this is not going to sound arrogant, but I do think that most people are not using the right inference strategies. And therefore, the Bayesian neural network predictions become very low quality. And it's a very difficult problem. And the AI community is making amazing strides in the last 5 years. And I am behind that field too, but there's lots of things that we will be coming in that improve the inference strategy. Does this answer your question, Audrey?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Beijing Shen.
All right. Thank you, Professor Bessa, for a very inspiring talk. My name is Beiyun Shen. I did my PhD at Johns Hopkins with Vicky Wang, and now I'm a postdoc at Columbia. So very inspiring talk. We just did some work on the PEPP recycled polymer blends, and we did a very intensive categorization on the rheology, microstructure, and also mechanical properties. So that makes perfect sense that you guys are working on, doing uncertainty quantification on these polymer blends, because especially recycled polymer blends, because they are very messy based on our experiment experience. So data can be very messy and the error bar can be huge. So my question regarding that talk is about like you mentioned, like you first applied this sort of finite element simulation to simulate the experiment results by assuming sort of microstructure distribution for the PP and P, which are immiscible between each other, right? So my question is, from our experimental result, it looks like they can be very highly anisotropic depending on the processing condition, and also regarding the microstructure, in addition to the volume fraction, even for the same volume fraction, the different distribution of these two phases can also make a very huge impact in the resulting mechanical properties. So my question is, have you guys incorporated or considered those different design variables to simulate or to capture those very complex systems with huge uncertainty?
Right, Beijing. Thank you for the question. And we should talk actually, because if you have experiments, I would love to collaborate. You're absolutely right. So these are among the hardest materials that I have to dealt with in my career because they have everything, right? They can be anisotropic. They are large deformations, right? They pretty much everything is in them, right? And so of course we have some simplifications. We did not consider the anisotropy locally. So our model, so for the actual constituents are isotropic, and the very few experimental results that we have from a company called LyondellBasell, they tried to make sure that they chose the material and the processing where the anisotropy would not show up, and it does not show up in the data that we have. However, you're absolutely right. In other materials and other choices, this can be important and should be incorporated. About the microstructure, yes, we actually consider different types of microstructure, different types of descriptors, and it makes a huge difference. Yeah. And the entire point actually is to homogenize that effect and then optimize the material based on precisely the microstructure that we get. And that's the entire point. So you're absolutely right.
Right, because based on our experience, it looks like depending on the morphology difference, say for example, if the sort of co-continuous between PE and PP phase, or the isolated PE phase in the sea of PP, or in the other way around, it's very different in terms of their rheology and their resulting mechanical property. But I can follow up with you with our paper. But thank you for your very inspiring talk.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis.
Hey, Miguel and Kaushik. Hey, this is Dennis Kochman,
Dennis.
Mechanical Engineering at ETH Zurich. Great talk, Miguel. I really enjoyed it. I think super important work. This could be great also for inverse designing things and all sorts of things. So this looks great.
Thank
My
you.
question is a more fundamental one and maybe a stupid one, but in classical UQ, one typically has to deal with these so-called unknown unknowns. And in your case, you assume that a model exists. And so I'm curious, because you place so much emphasis on aleatoric versus epistemic uncertainty, how do you distinguish aleatoric uncertainty from unresolved latent variables? Right? Something could be aleatoric relative to X, but it could be epistemic relative to X plus something that you don't even know of. And so I'm curious how this plays into your framework.
It's a great question. There's no doubt that, as you imply, uncertainty is on the eye of the beholder, right? So most of the time, aleatoric uncertainty is knowledge that we don't have. And if we did have it, it would no longer be aleatoric uncertainty. You're absolutely right. From our standpoint, what we're saying is simply that uncertainty exists, and it can come from all sorts. It could be because your measurement equipment is not, has a given resolution, because you simply don't know the physics of the problem well enough, right? And so the sources of the uncertainty can be very varied, and we don't claim that we find them. What we do claim is that we can find the distribution of the unknown that you have, right? And that's usually in practice what people care about. Otherwise, and I think that's what you're implying, you get the ultimate problem, which is you do the inverse problem to actually infer the uncertainty itself. And I have to be honest, this is kind of a dream. I would love to be able to solve a practical problem like this, but this is not what is indeed done here. That's actually a great question.
Sure. Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Jimmy?
thank you, Dennis.
Maybe I can defer. I'll let Li Hua ask the question first.
Okay, Li Hua, go
Sure.
ahead.
Hey, Miguel, thanks for the very nice talk. So this is Li Hua Jing. I'm an associate professor at UCLA. So my questions is about the polymer blend. I also missed the previous question and answer because of the internet connection. But my main question is about the modeling of the compatibilizer. So how did you model the compatibilizer in your polymer blend system?
Great question. Super simplified in this case. And I'll tell you why. This project was with a company called LyondellBasell, and they made us I think, a really difficult challenge because they told us, we want you to make these predictions, and the only information that we will give you is one stress strain curve for the PP multiple times, right? So a stress strain curve for the PP, a stress strain curve for the PE separately, and one peel test for the compatibilizer. They didn't even give the full curve for the compatibilizer, right? And so we didn't have enough information to actually come up with a full plasticity model for the compatibilizer. They just gave us the data sheet and a peel test. And so what we ended up doing was an elastoplastic model for the compatibilizer, very simple, whose secant modulus was obtained such that we would be able to predict that one test. So UI is extremely simplified, and I'm actually quite shocked that it could be so predictive. But what we found out is that the stiffness of the compatibilizer is much lower, and actually even most of the elastic behavior of the compatibilizer is enough to unload the remaining part. And if your remaining part is well modeled, it turned out to be quite forgiving. So I have to admit that we were a bit lucky on the compatibilizer aspect. Otherwise, a much better characterization would have been necessary. Does this make sense?
Right, right. So, but are you modeling the entire phase separation process, or you are just directly using the morphology?
I'm using directly the morphology.
I see.
And I am not assuming that the compatibilizer breaks. We have a model for that, but I wanted to remove as many parameters as I could to see if it would still be predictive. And so, like I said, it's so compliant that actually it's not there that it breaks. It's everywhere else in the matrix of the material, right? And so even though we have that, it doesn't reach the failure point there, which is good because we didn't have a good measure for the failure of the compatibilizer anyway. So we just got lucky.
And you assume like perfect bonding, there's no special interfacial properties.
Yeah, we did both, but like I said, it was not necessary to actually, because we had cohesive surfaces and cohesive elements. I do, just one thing that I forgot to mention is important. When I don't have the compatibilizer, then of course we have the cohesive surface because it's actually very brittle there, and that changes completely the mechanics of the problem. But for the compatibilizer, it's compliant enough that actually that was not the critical part and it doesn't hit it. Does that make sense?
I see. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jimmy, did you have a question?
Okay, sure. Miguel, excellent talk. I really enjoyed.
Thank
I
you.
don't claim that I understood everything, but certainly it's very inspiring. Maybe I'll follow Kaushik's instruction. I'm Jimmy Xia. I was a professor at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Just retired by the end of last month, end of June 2026.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Well earned.
I will join an institution called Eastern Institute of Technology in Ningbo, China, in a month or so. So I'll be there, maybe continue my research. All right, here's my
Congratulations.
Thank you. Here's my question. I really like this. Essentially, you pose the question, prediction with noise. How do you disentangle the uncertainties and so on? What about active matters, living things? We are
So
interested in collective motion of cells. They're full of noises. Their behavior is sometimes very unpredictable. But if we can learn how to somehow at least have some sense of how they would behave, it's very important. Let me give you an example. The outcome of certain diseases, if you can predict those things with active matter, with living cells, this would be huge. Can
I
you
understand.
provide some insights or give us some advice?
Yeah. Jimmy, you know, I've never had a paper in biology, and my wife keeps asking me to get into biology, so it's gonna happen soon. But biology is so complex, right? But you're so right to point out that uncertainty is incredibly important for these systems, because we know, even, you know, when you deploy a drug on someone, people react differently. Everything is about uncertainty, right? And so I do think, and I did mention this to colleagues at Brown, I do think that proper uncertainty quantification in the discovery process in biology in general and medicine may be incredibly important and frankly extremely underexplored in my humble opinion, right? So as a dream problem, I'm with you 100%. I think it makes a big difference, and I think methods like this could contribute to help. The problem is the amount of data, right? So if you're living in a data scarce world with highly specialized experiments where you have a few data points, this machinery will not be adequate, because probably you would have to consider methods that are less scalable, but that are quicker to find the answer to under those regimes. Although, to be frank, Jiasheng and I have tried to do this in data scarce, and it became competitive with Gaussian processes, but it required more computational effort to do so. But yeah, I think it is possible to use these. I think it should be done. And I think it could make a huge difference, because you could make predictions and be sure about the predictions you make and take into account the uncertainty itself, right? If these were patients and you said, okay, this is the effectiveness of the drug, right? And if this drug is on average less effective, but I'm much more certain about it, probably it could make a big difference when deployed in a population, right?
Indeed,
Plus
indeed.
the targeting, you know, this specialized medicine that we have now that is patient specific, right? These sort of considerations, I think, could make a very big difference. Yeah, I
But there
think
are also
you're right.
things or questions that are more fundamental. For example, with so much uncertainty and so much noise, the uh, morphogenesis process or embryogenesis, we all turn out to be having two eyes, one nose. You know, somehow nature is able to guide the process towards some kind of convergent outcome. That process is not fully understood.
It is very complex. And you have work, for example, from Dennis on generative models that use diffusion models. And noise is actually what kickstarts everything. So even in computational models, you actually have noise as the key driver to particular solutions that you end up having. And, you know, depending on what you're interested in, sometimes being robust to noise is crucial. Sometimes you want to use the noise to actually drive innovation, to drive these new designs that you end up with, right? And so, yeah, I think it is a fascinating topic. And when you bring in dimensions like instabilities, as the previous question, or active matter, you're compounding on the difficulty of the problem, but you're making it so much more interesting too.
Wonderful. We'd love to use VEBRNN model
to look into some of our observations and
It
see
would be
what
great,
happens.
Jimmy. Yeah, I'm all for it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mattia?
Hi, Miguel. Thanks for the amazing talk. I have probably a naive question because I'm not particularly expert in machine learning and AI. But I was wondering, since you mentioned the computational cost, right? And also following from previous questions, especially Jimmy's question on biological system, not only they are very noisy, but also multivariable. There are so many phenomena that are occurring at the same time. So your uncertainty is very expanded on a single variable, but you have multiple variables. So I was wondering, how does the computational cost for finding an answer scale with the number of variables that are at play?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I don't think I know if it's possible to say the scalability as a function of parameters, because there's also the dynamics of the process itself, right? So what I'm trying to say is that, for example, if your distribution is simple, or if your distribution is very complex, it will be different how you actually get to the answer, right? But to your point about the source of uncertainty and the parameters, I think it ties in well with what Dennis asked before as well, right? It's true that, probably the reason why you have more uncertainty in one place compared to another, right, is the sensitivity to different parameters that you have. Maybe some of them are more important to some things and others are more important for other things, right? And I think, if we could back calculate what explains this, it's another layer of complexity that is extremely interesting to explore. I think that the machinery that I'm presenting here, there's nothing in it that is thought to do that, right? There's nothing there in the model that is trying to disentangle the sources of the aleatoric uncertainty itself. The best thing I can give you right now is, you saw that I had distributions that were not Gaussian. The way that we're modeling them, this is not published, but it's okay, is by a mixture of Gaussians. So we still have Gaussians, but we mix them. And each Gaussian has a parameter that is learned as well. And so what you're trying to do, right, is to find the parameter that is associated to that part of the distribution. Maybe it's possible to then tie in those types of parameters with the actual inputs that we have, but we have not tried that. And I think it's a wonderful thing for the community also to explore, quite frankly. Does this answer your question, Mattia?
Yeah, partly yes. I reckon is also difficult to understand. I was wondering if there is some sort of scaling, right? Is it like if you increase the number of, if you double the number of variables, does the computational time double, or it becomes like a power law or exponentially increasing?
I wouldn't be able to tell. For example, even if you have the same problem and you just have a wider network, right? A much wider network, the mixture of the chains when you're doing the inference process, the Markov chains, if you do MCMC, for example, is much slower, right? So even the actual size of the model also affects the conversions that you have. So I'm not sure if at least I don't know what the law would be for the scaling with the number of parameters, and I'm not even sure if there is one. Yeah. So sorry, that's as far
No,
as I can go.
that's very a fascinating point, but probably physically we can't tell, right? There's no way because there's so much other variable there. Uncertainty that goes in. Yeah. Thanks so much.
What I do know is that the scaling is reasonable, right? That's why with Bayesian neural networks, you can actually solve big problems, right? But if you're talking about, imagine that you have hundreds of thousands of parameters, millions of data points, it's infeasible right now. You can't do it. So I would say that for engineering problems, it scales sufficiently well. For computer science problems, if you want to train a large language model with a Bayesian way, I think that's still far from being possible.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Any others? don't see any other questions. Miguel, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you, Kaushik, for doing this too, huh? We have to wake up very
No, it's a
early.
pleasure. It's always fun to listen to you, and you certainly have earned your port for today.
Thank you,
Maybe a
everyone, for
little
being
early,
here.
but it's never too early. Okay, I see one last question. Sukanya, go ahead.
Sorry, just wanted to ask if you do this kinds of webinars as a series or this is a one-off, so I can follow you guys.
Maybe I can take this question. Yeah, this is a series. It's monthly,
Okay.
but the date is not fixed because we're trying to accommodate the schedule of the moderator, in this case, Kaushik, and the speaker, in this case,
I
Miguel.
understand, yeah.
So yeah, stay tuned. You can see on iMechanic on LinkedIn, we post regularly. We have, well, actually, I'm going to advertise soon. I don't know if it's the right time. The next seminar, maybe I can take the chance to share the screen, if I may.
Oh, yes, sure.
So I can show you the next seminar slide. So on next month, on August 14, we're gonna have the next talk by Omar Saleh, University of California, Santa Barbara, and the moderator, discussion leader is gonna be Robert McMeekin from the same university, and it's gonna be a droplet that's Stephen Gels. And this is an interesting detour from our tradition because Omar is a physicist, is not our traditional solid mechanics, but the kind of work he has done is quite interesting for solid mechanician because it's an interface of chemistry, soft matter, and biology. And in fact, he's actively collaborating with McMeekin. So we're gonna learn something a little bit outside the solid mechanics, but I'm sure most of our method will be applicable and functional. So you're going to see this seminar, this flyer on LinkedIn and iMechanic. I will post it soon.
Perfect, thanks.
Great. I think that was a good way of ending. And thank you once again, Miguel. Thank you, Mattia, for doing this.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you,
All right.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care.